Hello, and welcome to Fireline Safety Refresher Training. This video will ask you to dust off some risk management tools such as the 10 fire orders, LCES, and the 18 watch-out situations, and use them in some real-life fire scenarios from the 2001 fire season. Hopefully this will jog your memory and provide you with some mental triggers that will help you recognize and mitigate safety hazards you may encounter this year. But before we get started, I want to share with you some startling statistics about our fire community. These stats are also outlined in your student workbook. At the time of this taping, there have been 809 reported deaths in wildland fire operations, 18 of which occurred in the 2001 fire season. Between 1976 and 1999, we averaged 70 entrapments and 43 shelter deployments per year. I don't know about you, but that sounds awfully high to me. And I have to ask, what have we learned from these events that can help us lower these numbers in the future? In 1994, 34 people were killed in wildland fire operations, many of whom were our highly trained Type 1 firefighters. After that season, the fire community vowed to learn from those tragic deaths. We vowed to strengthen our training curriculum, stiffen our qualification requirements, and provide some standards for fire operations that would hold people accountable for maintaining firefighter safety. Safety first, 6 minutes for safety, safetygram, safe net. Safety's been drilled into our heads at every level. Tragically, since 1994, 108 more people have been killed in wildland fire operations. What is it about there's nothing out there worth a human life that we don't seem to understand? There must be something out there worth a human life because we continue to see between 10 and 20 fatalities a year. Why are we, here today, not among the 108 people who have given their lives since 1994? What are we doing right that they were doing wrong? Do we train differently? Or is it just a matter of luck that we're still here? What are we doing to keep ourselves safe? What performance standard do you personally hold yourself accountable to? Do you consider yourself a professional firefighter, or is this just a fun summer job? Are we just here for the money, or do we consider ourselves students of fire? How seriously do you take this job? Because the truth is, fire doesn't care how old you are, what type of resource you are, how big your organization is, what position you hold, what training you've had, or even how much experience you've had. Given a certain set of circumstances, which usually involves some element of human error, fire can result in your death. We at the BLM Training Unit urge you to take this training seriously. Participate in the exercises with a desire to learn something new and share something new with someone sitting next to you. Get the most out of the collective experience in your training groups. There's always something new to learn about fire. Try to advance your level of knowledge to the next level, whatever that level is for you. Actively seek out new information and use it this year on the Fireline. Good luck with this course and with the coming fire season.
It's a serious job, and the attitude of your crew is going to affect, the attitude of your performance. And if your crew is professional and does the job correctly, and at the end of the shift when you're back at fire camp, you can joke and laugh all you want, but the time you're spent out on the line, there should be a definite game face and serious attitude out there. You have all winter to joke around. Just your life insurance policy out on the line is your 10 and 18, your fire orders and your 18 watch-out situations.
As you all know, there is a huge bundle of reference material available for you to use when making decisions regarding fire. In this course, we will focus on the Interagency Incident Response Pocket Guide, or the Yellow Book as many people call it. We talked to Paul Hefner, who was one of the originators of this book. Paul started his career back in 1966. He's a Type 1 incident commander and is currently a fire staff officer on the Payette National Forest in Idaho. I want to share with you his thoughts on this reference.
Several years back, there were several of us here at the Fire Center that had recently come from the field, and we were noticing a lot of development with pocket cards, wallet cards, different publications that in some cases they all said the same thing. In other areas we saw different regions of the Forest Service and units of BLM publishing this initial response pocket guide. They were doing it individually, And every one of them was just a little different from the other. And as we all know, every firefighter fights fire in different areas, and to have that inconsistency around the country wasn't necessarily the best situation. Well, our initial thought was that the Fireline handbook addresses quite well dealing with management situations, with position descriptions, checklists in overhead positions, and some ICS typing and some of those standards within the incident command system. It doesn't really hit very closely the tools that are needed for the on-the-ground firefighter. So our initial hit was to not duplicate the Fireline handbook, although there are a few things that are in the Fireline handbook that are also in the pocket guide. But this idea was to have it as a pocket guide for the on-ground firefighter. The Fireline handbook could potentially be in a pack or in a briefcase for the individuals that supervise the on-the-ground firefighters. It may be 1 or 2 levels up. And then any other operational guides, example of the Standards for Fire and Aviation Operations, that would be the book that would probably be in the vehicle, in the briefcase, on the FMO's desk, and on the line officer or agency administrator's desk as a guide, as a reference to what are the standards for fire operations. So there'd basically be a 3-phase, 3-level reference. The green pages of the Initial Response Pocket Guide are operational pages, and we put those at the front of the book because they're so important in the way we do business. They need to be looked at weekly, daily, during your 6-minute for safety. They involve risk management. They involve tactical watchouts, many different checklists, things that you may encounter every day, but things that you may encounter only in a rare event. It's so important that you put so much emphasis, you put a great level of emphasis on knowing what's in the green pages, and you practice these things that are in the green pages. If we teach the book is included through all our refreshers, our rookie schools, all those areas that we teach our firefighters or we refresh our firefighters. If all the elements of the book are taught during that, I think the people will start to come around more and be able to use it as a tool instead of just handing it off to them. A seasoned firefighter will see the tools in the box and say, yeah, these are things that I can use. Well, this is great, this is great. The beginning firefighter may not know a lot of the applicability because they've never been in these situations before. So again, it's so important that we teach the book, we make it a standard, that this is part of your everyday life. This is no different than that driver's license that you have in your pocket that you have to take a test on every so many years. It will greatly increase the way we all consistently fight fire, whether it's a person from Alabama come to the West or we go to Alabama and help them fight fire. If we're all doing it the same way, I think we can be a lot safer and more efficient. The other thing is that terminology. This also helps clean up some of our terminology, many different ways of saying the same thing. All these checklists have standard terminology, PMS, NWCG approved terminology. If we're all using this as a teaching tool and then as an application tool, I think we better our understanding from each other as we come from all different parts of the country together to fight fire.
To help you get acquainted with this book, we'll ask you to use it while working through some exercises. You can use other references also if you like, but I think you'll find this book very helpful. It was designed to be used on the ground by working firefighters. So to get us started, let's put on our fire hats and go look at the Fridley fire that burned part of Montana this last season.
Okay. Welcome to the Fridley fire, and it's September 1st in just outside of Bozeman, Montana. The Fridley fire is approximately 24,000 acres, and it started about a week ago after a lightning storm. The fire exploded to about 15,000 acres in one day after a major wind event. Afterwards, the sporadic winds from all different directions have pretty much made the fire edge fan out in all directions. As a division soup, I came in and there was a major edge of fire along the division that I have, this Division Lima, and the Division Lima is approximately 5 miles long. The main edge of the fire came up from the north, and it was a wind-driven fire, causing spot fires up to half a mile in front of the head of the fire. The fuel type is primarily subalpine fir, and it's very patchy. Areas where the subalpine fir was contiguous pretty much maintained a crown fire during the whole event. As the fire hit the edges and came downslope, it hit into patchier fuels, and it caused spot fires throughout the whole area. Off to the east, the fire has burned all through this area, leaving islands of unburned fuels, and also spot fires throughout the whole edge, which we're trying to deal with now. Spot fires are throughout the whole area, and if you notice, the grasses in this area, the meadows, have not burned. Also, if it was in a draw, most of the draws have not burned, but the fire is carrying underneath, and every once in a while will hit areas of subalpine fir. It'll torch, and the gusty, erratic winds we've been having the last week send spot fires all over. Now we have 2 strike teams of engines, which are primarily Type 6s. We have 2 water tenders, which are 5,000 gallons, a D6 dozer. We also have an item called the Proteus, which carries 3,000 gallons, and it's like a skidder. It can also shear and knock over trees as part of its capabilities. And we have 2 skidgens, which are skidders of different sizes, which can carry up to 3 to 1,500 gallons of water, and 6 hand crews. The weather forecast was for hotter and drier. It's been in the 80s, and it's going to be in the high 80s today, which causes it to really heat up during the day. We also have relative humidities dropping down to the mid-teens. Between 15 to 17% is expected today. Our trigger point where we start seeing torching with the subalpine fir is right around 20%. Also with winds, which is a critical element in the torching too, that we found, especially if it's going to carry in the canopy, is around 15 to 20 mile-an-hour winds. And today's forecast was for winds and generally between 10 to 15 miles an hour, but we're having gusts up to 25 miles an hour, which is really causing sporadic torching throughout the division.
I hope that dusted away some cobwebs and got you into the fire game again. I also hope that the Yellow Book proved to be very helpful. Let's go back to Montana now and hear how the division supervisor handled that situation.
As part of our initial attempts to suppress the fire, we tried the traditional put in hand line and dozer line, and also used natural barriers. We also used burned off of roads, tried burning off of roads, and those proved ineffective because the fuels just would not carry the fire. If they did carry the fire, in those instances it'd jump into the canopy, and we get just so much torching and spotting that was quickly eliminated as an opportunity to secure the hand lines. After the burnouts failed, what we did is we spread the crews out, connected in segments of line as best we could, and used the resources we had, the Type 6 engines, to begin mopping up the hot spots and the spot fires, and to get the fire down onto the ground. And there we fought it with traditionally just mopping up the spot fires. We didn't get ahead of ourselves. We let certain amounts of the fire burn so that we had anchor points along the way. And as the fire line and the mopping up effort progressed, we were able to secure more and more line, and we're pretty close to securing the division today.
Now remember, if your solutions didn't exactly match the actual events, that doesn't necessarily mean that your solution was wrong. Firefighters generally want to focus on tactics during these scenarios. I want to stress, however, that the important thing here is that you focus on the thought process you employ to address the situation. Can you justify your solution with a thorough analysis? Have you utilized all the tools that are available? And have you addressed all the safety concerns that are present? And now that we're all thinking about fire again, let's go over some of the basic tools we use as firefighters. The 10 fire orders, the 18 situations to shout watch out, and LCES were all created to keep firefighters out of harm's way. Yet every year we seem to have both fatalities and injuries as a result of people breaking one of the fire orders or not paying attention to one of the watch out situations. To closely examine these tools, I'm going to ask you to complete the next exercise in your student workbook. Now I want to take you to a fire that happened this last season in the Pacific Northwest. This will be a 3-part exercise, and I hope it will solidify the importance of situational awareness in regards to the 10 fire orders and the 18 watch-out situations. Let's take a look.
My name is Thomas Taylor. I was the squad boss on the incident that will be discussed. I received the page to report to my duty station at 0:48 the morning of July 11th. The 20-person crew I was assigned to consisted of people from 3 separate ranger districts. The crews were compiled in the early morning, and we arrived at the fire at approximately 0900 that same morning. The fire was located in a steep, narrow canyon with 3,000 vertical feet of terrain on both sides. The fuel type consisted of an overstory of spruce, Douglas fir, lodgepole, and ponderosa pine, as well as cottonwoods. The understory consisted of birch trees and a large variety of shrubs and bushes. There was also a heavy concentration of dead and down material on the forest floor. At that time, the temperature was about 70 degrees with a relative humidity of about 50%, and the winds were calm. Initial size-up of the fire showed that the main body of the fire was contained between the road and the river, with a number of small spot fires across the river to the east burning in a riparian zone. The resources available consisted of our 20-person Type 2 crew, 2 Mark III pumps, 1,500 feet of hose, numerous gated Ys, fittings, and nozzles. The hotshot crew had done some preliminary line cutting and would be departing the incident for a rest period. Air support had been ordered, but its arrival time was unknown.
Welcome back. At this point, let's go back to Tom Taylor and find out what actually happened.
We received our briefing about 10:30. The tactics consisted of the following. The crew would be split into 3 squads. Squad 1 was assigned to take care of a slop over on the main fire, then would proceed across the river to aid in the suppression of the spots. Squad 2 would be in charge of the setup and operation of the pumps. My squad, Squad 3, was supposed to anchor into existing hand line and flank the largest spot fire using hand tools and a progressive hose lay. The remaining crew member would be our lookout and would be placed in a rock outcropping to the east of the fires. The escape routes for this incident were clearly marked and easily accessible, back down the line, across the log, and to the road. We engaged the fire around 1100 hours. Temperatures at this time were in the 80s with a relative humidity of about 20%, and the winds were calm. Squads 2 and my squad, Squad 3, moved the pumps and hoses across the log to the east side of the river. From there, my squad then proceeded to the anchor point and started with our operations. As the day progressed, a number of problems occurred. With numerous spot fires, heavy torching, and extreme fire behavior, additional resources were ordered, pump operations were abandoned, and the lookout was removed from their position as fire activity increased beyond our control. It was then that we decided to disengage the incident and retreat to our safety zone, a riparian zone next to the road, later known as the lunch spot. We were greeted by the hotshot crew, which was called back after 2 hours of rest. A district AFMO arrived shortly thereafter. At this time, all personnel on the fire were at the lunch spot. By this point in time, a break was needed. We sharpened tools, ate lunch, filled our canteens, and observed a full-on crown fire. Weather taken at the lunch spot indicated temperatures of 87 degrees, relative humidities at 17%, and winds 5 to 6 miles per hour.
As you can see, things are heating up on this incident, and remember that the crew was assembled and on the road most of the night before. To keep us all together, let's assume now that we have all disengaged the fire and we're sitting at the lunch spot. What needs to happen before you would consider re-engagement? With this in mind, let's get back into our groups and proceed with part 2 of this exercise. Firefighters work in a dynamic environment. The only real constant is change. Paul Gleason, an ex-hotshot supervisor and a creator of LCES, once said that fire supervisors are asked to make complex decisions given limited information in a dynamic environment. This is true. At times, a fire situation can change so fast that it's hard to keep current on your situational awareness. We have to realize, however, that at these times of rapid change, a valid situational awareness is the most important. It's always easy to be critical as a Monday morning quarterback, but as we go back to Tom and hear what actually happened, I want you to put yourselves on this fire and think about what you would do in this situation. Be specific. Would you call someone? Would you say something to someone? When? What exactly would you say? What are your concerns and how exactly would you address them? Let's go back to Tom and find out what happened.
Approximately 30 minutes into our break, the hotshot superintendent and his assistant scouted the road up the canyon from the lunch spot. At that same time, 2 engines proceeded past the lunch spot to patrol for spot fires up the road. Upon encountering a spot fire approximately 1/2 mile from the lunch spot, 1 engine radioed the IC and requested 1 squad to assist them in the handling of the fire. The IC then asked for the crew boss trainee and Squad 1 to head up the road with him and tie in with the engine. Once they arrived at the spot fire, they felt they needed some more assistance, so the crew boss trainee then radioed me and asked for my squad. I then rounded up my folks and we proceeded up the road, passing the crew boss trainee in an empty van as he was headed back to the lunch spot. We arrived at the spot fire and noticed the engine was departing. We then geared up and walked about 100 feet off the road and tied in with the IC and Squad 1. The spot fire was small in size, so I instructed my folks to help Squad 1 digging line. About 2 minutes go by and we receive a call from the hotshot superintendent that we should get back into the van and head back down the road to the lunch spot. Because they had left the lunch spot to assist in fire operations, based on the fire behavior, they made a no-go decision on the mission and went back down the road to the south, along with the remaining squad, the crew boss trainee, the 2 engines, and the district AFMO. We received another call that we should head out as quickly as possible. So the IC, my squad, and Squad 1 retreat back up to the road and pile into the 1 remaining van. Squad boss number 1 and 3 of his folks see that getting into the van was time-consuming, so they start off down the road on foot. The rest of us quickly get in the van and proceed down the road. While shadowing the 4 on foot, we get about 100 feet in front of them and we observe a wall of fire crossing the road, blocking our escape. We then turn the van around, pick up the 4 crew members from Squad 1, and drive up the road to the eventual deployment site. By this time, my blood was pumping. 14 people crammed inside 1 van. Emotions were running high. We drove up the road with fire behind us. Fire was now burning very hot on both sides of the road at enormous intensity. We stopped the van in an area that was green, calm, and open. The Chouach River ran smooth and calm in contrast to the heavy activity around us. We got out of the van to observe the fire. Some took pictures, others sat in bewilderment of what was happening. I puffed on a cigarette while pondering the events of that day. To the east, the fire was burning from point of origin up the canyon walls and scoured the upper third of the slope. The column of smoke was huge. Just as I put out my cigarette, a Dodge pickup had made its way down the road to our location. I quickly approached the vehicle and asked the driver where the road went. I was sadly informed that it was a dead end. My heart sank with the fact that we were trapped. 14 firefighters, 2 civilians, and no way out. I quickly told the IC, this is a dead-end road. He said, we will be safe here. We had 2 saws and had discussed reducing some of the fuels in the area, but the IC decided that that would not be necessary. So I thought it would be to my best interest to hike up into the rocks to get a better perspective on what was headed our way. I saw from a distance a full-on crown fire, consuming everything in its path from one side of the canyon to the other. But at the site, it was surprisingly calm. 5 crew members from the same district had sat down on 2 large boulders 15 feet from the road. The rest of the crew, now joined by 2 civilians, gathered on the road. The fire was now burning with tremendous energy, forming 2 columns. The column to the east was now huge, with the fire burning up the canyon floor, away from us to the northeast. The column to the west seemed more tame. Though it was devouring everything in its path, my view was blocked, so I could not see its full size. So basically, from my locations in the rocks, I could see 2 separate columns moving away from each other and forming a V. As time passed, that V kept moving closer and closer. "We will be safe here" kept running through my mind. I thought that I would stay in the rocks until it got too hot, and then I would head down to the road. As the V came overhead, I ran down the rocks towards the road. About 25 feet from the road, I was hit by an enormous wall of superheated air, as if I had run into a freight train. I then retreated back up into the rocks a short distance, tore off my pack, and grabbed my shelter. Tearing the tab off my shelter and pulling it out of its sheath was something I had only done in training. Now it was the real deal. With shelter in hand, I simply held it out in front of me. The winds opened it on its own like a parachute. The shelter was very tough to hold on to. Just before climbing in my shelter, I saw 5 folks running up the rocks towards me. They were only 15 to 20 feet below me, and I immediately yelled, "Deploy, deploy." I then put 1 foot in my shelter and rolled into it. The moment I entered my shelter, I was hit with intense heat and wind, instantly overcome with fear and terror. The fetal position allowed me to keep the shelter from burning me, as I was able to push it away from me with my right hand while holding down the shelter with my left arm and both feet. With intense heat and troubles breathing, it was not a good situation. I had to think fast. If I stay in this shelter, I will die. If I choose to leave my shelter, I will die, but I can't give up. So I made the decision to flee from my shelter down the rocks and to the river. With my last breath, I threw the shelter off of me, ran down through the smoke and fire, across the road, and dove into the river. The other firefighters and the 2 civilians joined me in the river approximately 15 minutes later. After a head count was done, we knew that there were 5 people missing. After the IC tried to contact the squad boss on the radio and having no return traffic, I climbed from the water and proceeded back up into the rocks and discovered 4 of my co-workers. Shouting their names yielded no response. With the intense heat being held in by the rocks, I returned back to the road and discovered 1 of the 5 in the van severely burned but alive. I then grabbed the IC's radio and notified air attack and coordinated our rescue.
At this time, your local facilitator will lead the class in a discussion on the lessons learned from the 30-mile fire. You should turn to Part 3 of this exercise in your student workbook. Also available for you as an addendum to your student workbook is the incident timeline taken from the 30-mile fire investigation report. Visiting the fatality site on a 30-mile fire is a sad and humbling experience. I remember looking around and thinking about how we go about selecting a safety zone. What is a safety zone? How do we define it? Isn't it different for each situation? We train people that a safety zone is an area that you can survive in without deploying your fire shelter. Well, that tells us what a safety zone should do. But how do we know how big a safety zone should be in order to accomplish that? Safety zone selection is something we often talk about, but we seldom discuss specific parameters regarding necessary dimensions and characteristics. Safety zone selection criteria must include the worst-case fire behavior, possible airflows, and radiant heat considerations. I walked away from the 30-mile incident with a new appreciation for the movement of superheated air. When Tom Taylor was asked why he didn't continue to go down to the road from the rock pile, he responded, "You don't run into the face of a bullet." To give you a more scientific perspective on safety zone selection, we spoke with Dr. Brett Butler at the 30-mile incident. Listen to what he had to say.
You know, coming and visiting the site of the 30-mile fire, I mean, it's another tragic fire that it's always sad to have things like this happen and lose people, firefighters, and it's frustrating, and you know, a whole bunch of things that upset us and make us wonder what we're doing and what we need to change. But for me today, coming and seeing the site and talking to a couple of people that were here, I think it's made me think, well, I need to sharpen the pencil a little bit more. If I'm going out on a fire, or I'm talking to people that are going to be going out on a fire and say, you know, you need to look for safety zones. I think even more than that, they need to look specifically at, you know, where is the safety zone relative to the fuel? In the case here, there's a couple different choices, rocks, slides, but in some of them there's trees right next to the slide, just across the road, and some of them maybe there's a little more space, another 100 feet, which would make a huge difference. Another factor here is that, you know, it looks like a good clean rock slide, but you get walking around there or look a little closer and there's a lot of dead and down debris there that's going to catch on fire and burn. Now, most cases that's going to burn later on after the main fire front passes, but I think I'm going to, you know, certainly try to emphasize, you go to a safety zone and it's probably, hopefully it's not a last resort, but when you're looking at safety zones, find the area that's, you know, the biggest you can get, but also anything that burns, you want to stay as far away from it as you can, whether it's trees, whether it's dead and down debris, anything like that. And then you also need to think about, where's the fire going to come from and where is it going to be going? And in terms of that, what kind of winds are going to be pushing it? If you're in the bottom of a steep canyon, then you can have some really strong winds, and that's the same thing that happened on the South Canyon fire. Similar to here, really steep canyon, and then the topography drives the wind. So if you have turns in the canyon, the wind is just going to follow those turns. And in fact, on the South Canyon fire, you know, it had a really strong cold front driving winds from the west, but the firefighters that died on that fire were caught because of winds that were going south to north, so completely 90 degrees off the general flow, and just all topography driven. So you need another thing you need to think about are, what are the winds going to do? How's the topography going to influence the local wind flow right where you are? Certainly experience plays a major part and is important, but also you need that quantitative method of analyzing or evaluating what the fire is going to do. Same thing applies to safety zones. You know, talked about safety zones forever. Everybody, you know, for 20, 30, I don't know, 50 years, 100 years, whatever since we've been fighting fire, you need to have a safety zone. What is it? Can we define quantitatively what a safety zone is? I don't know. That's a good question everybody should ask themselves. If they don't have a method to say this is what a safety zone is for this type of fire behavior, then they need to find something, whatever it is, some number, some way to come up with a number. Jack Cohen and I thought we could make some impact was do a simple engineering analysis and look at the energy transfer and say, you know, how far away do you have to be to keep from getting burned? And, you know, it's a relatively simple, kind of almost a homework problem, but I think it's provided at least a baseline, and if it's wrong, that's fine. If people find out that it's wrong, it's okay, but at least they can say, this doesn't work, we need something bigger. But, you know, the basic rule of thumb we came up with was you need to be 4 times the flame height, the maximum flame height that you're seeing. You need to be that far, at least that far away from the fire to keep from getting burned. And like I say, maybe that's doesn't fit all conditions, but at least take that one and try it out, and if it doesn't work, think about it when you're out on a fire line, you go to a safety zone, You watch the fire go by. If you're comfortable, you can get closer, you know, think, how far away am I from that flame? What's the conditions? What's the weather? What's the fire doing? Write that down maybe in a notebook and use it to kind of build your own quantitative model.
Like Dr. Butler says, I hope you test this rule of thumb this summer and use it as a baseline for determining a method that does work in your area. For further information on safety zones, you should refer to the Safety Zone Guidelines in your Incident Response Pocket Guide. Remember, it is the right and obligation of every firefighter to know their escape route and safety zone. With that in mind, let's hear some final thoughts from the survivors from the 30 Mile Fire.
Yeah, it can happen real quick. Let your squad boss or let your crew boss know what's going on in your location. Really be assertive on what you're observing. Don't be complacent. You know, just because if you have a wind shift, you really need to stress that, regardless if it's just a real quick burst or a prolonged, definite wind shift out of direction, that type of thing. And you know, trust the feelings you have. You know, listen to your gut. If your gut's telling you it's not a good situation because of changing fire behavior, weather, stuff like that, then it's probably a good idea to let your squad boss or crew bosses know, and you know, take the steps to get out of there. You know, you assume that your escape routes and safety zones are going to be pretty clear and cut and dry and taken care of, but if your escape routes are cut off, then you know, where does your safety zone go from there? Is it safety zones? Is it plural or is it singular? Do you have one escape route to one safety zone, or do you have multiple escape routes to multiple safety zones? You need to really bide your time. Do you spend more time initial attacking a fire, or do you spend time on following a procedure and setting yourself up properly so you can have adequate safety zones and escape routes? If you prepare for the worst and you're geared up for the worst case scenario, but it doesn't turn out to be that way, then you're a winner. If you gear up for the worst case scenario and it does turn out to be the worst case scenario, but you survive that, then you're a winner as well. So it's a win-win situation, hoping, you know, and gearing up for the worst case scenario. Unfortunately, we put ourselves in that situation where we have to deal with those things. But
so not enough time to, at least for me, to have prepared myself in a safe way to go in the shelter. You know, as far as facing the correct direction, getting rid of your pack, fully extending the shelter. I went in from a prone position. I'd never trained. I trained from a standing position only. I deployed from the ground, so that was something I didn't know how to do, but I did it. I didn't do it as good as it could have been done. The shelter itself didn't fully extend. I was rolled up into a fetal position rather than a fully extended position. Therefore, I had less of a barrier, an insulation barrier in the shelter. I had less air to breathe, and that feeling of being curled up in that ball, I think, makes you feel even more kind of just more trapped, and you know, that intensity is just kind of heightened. So, like anyone will ever tell you, I mean, for me, it was the most afraid I've ever been in my life, and everything that you've read about, people thinking about, you know, you're going to die, feeling the presence of, you know, death or darkness in there. I felt all of that. Fighting the urge to pull off the shelter and make a run for it or get out because you feel so trapped. Went through that. But then, I mean, for me, I guess one of the other things I'd say as far as a recommendation to firefighters also is, which most people already do, is to carry a tool on their belt, for one thing, carry a Leatherman or carry a knife or some sort, because what became sort of my way of coping through it was I fumbled around and was able to get my my Leatherman out and started to dig into the dirt to make a better breathing space. And I would dig a little bit and then get as close as I could to the ground to get the cleanest air that was, you know, cooler, and just take a breath and then come back up and start digging again, and then breathe, dig, and breathe. And that was my way of staying focused and staying calm and finding the good air. And you know, as far as I'm concerned, that saved me, you know.
I think now would be a good time for a quick break so we can stretch our legs and collect our thoughts. And now we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about operational briefings. There are two types of people at every briefing, the briefing givers and the briefing receivers. Both parties have one common goal, that is to share pertinent information about the situation before the start of a mission. If you've been fighting fire for more than 10 minutes, chances are pretty good that you've received some sort of operational briefing. And if you've been around a while, you know that briefings can range between excellent and awful. Everyone seems to have their own style and format. So to get some advice on giving briefings, we talked to John Gould. John was a smoke jumper for many years and has a private pilot's license. He's currently the Wildland Fire and Aviation Safety Specialist for the BIA and is a member of the National Fire and Aviation Safety Team. Let's hear what he had to say.
Well, in the aviation world, you can see that whenever a briefing has to be given, they go by a checklist front to back. And I think that it's because it's so important that nothing be missed. In the fire aviation world, you see it in helicopter briefings. Before you take a helicopter ride anytime, you have a briefing, and it all comes from a checklist. Aviation, they're great users of briefings and checklists. When you watch your pilot take off next time you take a flight, and look, and he'll be using a checklist that he goes through when he takes off, when he puts it in cruise, when he starts down on the descent to landing, and before landing. You know, there's checklists for everything because it's so important that nothing be missed. And I think that in firefighter briefings right now, if we could take a cue from the aviation world and use a checklist, and here in the Incident Response Pocket Guide, they're coming out with a new briefing checklist that I think is an excellent checklist that will help you develop your briefings and put them out to your audience in such a way that they'll be able to get what they need out of the briefing. And since it's in the Incident Response Pocket Guide, I think that the receivers of the briefing will be able to follow along and make sure that they get everything they need to know out of the briefing as well.
We traveled around this summer and heard a number of different operational briefings. Some were good and some were very bad. How often have you heard, watch for snags, watch for snakes, or it's going to be hot and dry today? Without details, these comments may not really help new firefighters. Many times the briefing giver fails to tell the receiver what they should do if they encounter any of these hazards. And what does hot and dry mean anyway in terms of temperature and relative humidity? We want to share with you a clip from a good briefing that we heard in Idaho. Pay attention to the use of a checklist and particular attention to the detail in which the provider gives in terms of hazard mitigation.
Okay, my name is Mike Ellsworth. I was the initial attack IC on this fire, which is called the Rough Diamond Fire. And for the records, it's fire number 266. Currently, right now, it is about 7,000 to 8,000 acres and growing rapidly. The field type is grass, brush, juniper, and it's getting pretty close to the tree line. So start burning some Doug fir and the forest fuel types in there. It started Sunday night at about 21:30. 4 BLM engines attacked it, and then about yesterday afternoon, about 2 o'clock, it made the big run, and obviously you see what we got now. The weather for today will be 83 to 89 degrees. RH is 7 to 13. Yesterday about 9% RH is when the big run made it. So anytime in our district we get below 11% is when we start experiencing the extreme fire behavior. The winds are going to be similar to what we have seen, 5 to 15 miles per hour with gusts of 20 out of the north-northwest. Unfortunately, it's 9:45 right now, and the winds have already picked up. I think last reading I got was about 11 miles per hour. So be aware of the winds. That's going to be your main problems for the day. Some objectives for the day. We have a town south of the fire right now, about 3 miles, called Silver City. It is not only is there residents there, but it is a major historical town in Idaho and the area. We have an urban interface structure team established there with dozers, to do prep work for the town. We also want to keep the fire west of the Silver City Road, which is this road which takes off on this side, on the east, and also maintain any line that we have put in. We also are having a pretty aggressive air show. 3 helicopters, 2 seats, 3 retardant planes, and lead planes and air attack is all up there. So you'll hear quite an air show going on today. As far as resources, we have 7 BLM engines. One of those is a light, 8 hand crews, 5 dozers, and 6 tenders. And refer to your IAP of what resources are delegated to your division. I believe we have 4 more hand crews on order, a couple more dozers, and some more engines. As you can see, 1 engine just showed up. Also refer to your plan for your communications. Basically, Boise Direct will be our command. TAC 1 is Division A, TAC 2 is Division B, and the Idaho SOA is our air-to-ground. Like I said before, the Urban Interface Group has been established, and you, as a hand crew, may be called upon to help them out. So refer to your Urban Interface Watch Out checklist. The fuel moisture in the area are extremely low for this year. We had very little snowpack, which has in turn made the fuels extremely dry for the summer. Like I said before, 11% RH is when we get extreme fire behavior. Topography is steep and there are some canyons. This is where the fire is making its biggest runs, are in the canyons. At nighttime we are experiencing a lot of runs downhill due to the about 10 mile per hour downslope winds. As far as safety is concerned, first of all, driving out to the fire line, this road is pretty gravelly, so let's keep our speed down to about 15 to 20 miles per hour and our lights on, and make sure communication is with other people. If there's a car coming on, let everyone know. Due to the rocky terrain, the footing is going to be a problem. Watch above and below other crew members for any rocks that's coming, and make sure you call out rock and they can hear, so no one gets a big old rock in the noggin. Snakes are in the area. Rattlesnakes is the main species. Avoid the snakes. Do not attempt to handle the snakes. And inform other crew members that you found one. Yeah, they're fun to look at, but leave them alone. They do bite, obviously. If you do get bit by a snake, we'll initiate the medical plan, which is to contact your crew boss, Division Soup, which will contact Helibase, where we have a couple EMTs on board there. LCS, utilize human repeaters. If your communications down in canyon is sort of tough, have a guy on top of the hill so that he can be a human repeater for everyone. Because of the steep terrain as well, you probably want to establish 2 escape routes to your safety zone. Right now, we've been successful of using the black as our safety zone. Hydration, make sure that everyone has 2 gallons of water per person. It is going to get hot, and it is going to be dry, and it is going to be some nasty climbing for you guys. So if you need more water, let your crew boss and the Division Soup know, and we can ferry some out on the helicopter. Watch out for unburned fuel between you and the fire line. You may be going indirect if the fire activity picks up again today. You may be caught in the bottom of a draw working, mopping up, and you can't see the main fire. Make sure you're establishing your lookouts to take care of that. It is going to get hotter and drier today. The winds are increasing, like I said, 11 miles per hour. In the canyons, there's going to be some erratic winds. So if you got fire out there, just be aware of that. Also, if any wind changes or temperature changes you're noticing, don't keep that information to yourself. Pass that on to your crew boss and your Division Soup, so that Division Soup can let other resources know about the wind change and the weather changes. Also, if a burnout is necessary, we did quite a number of burnouts. As you can see, we're doing one right now, which is actually been very successful. Do not ignite any burnout until Division Soups and Operations Chief know about this. That way everyone can be planned and on the same page. Go over the 10 and 18 today before you head out to the fire line. Check your urban, especially the urban interface checklist, because that may be a factor today or tomorrow. And utilize risk assessment at all possibilities. Is there any questions from the crew? Have a good, safe day.
A good briefing is vital to safe fire line operations, yet we spend very little time training people on how to properly deliver a good briefing. To help standardize the basic operational briefing, a new briefing checklist has been added to the Yellow Book. This checklist can and should be used by both the briefing giver and the receiver. Remember, the briefing receiver has the responsibility to ask questions regarding information that the giver may have overlooked. To help you get acquainted with this new checklist, we'll have you get back into your groups and complete a simple exercise. This next section is going to cover an aspect of our jobs that has been gaining attention over the past few years. The problems we face in the wildland-urban interface are rapidly becoming more and more complex. To deal with this increasing complexity, many urban areas have implemented some interesting and effective cooperative agreements with local municipal fire departments, which include shared radio frequencies and cross-training. To get us thinking about the various safety concerns when wildland fire approaches an urban area, let's go back to the Rough Diamond Fire in Idaho. You're about to see a clip from another operational briefing that was addressing the threat of fire on the historic town of Silver City. After viewing this clip, you'll be asked to get into your groups and talk about 3 tools that are available to you for use in these situations. In your incident response pocket guide, you will find the urban wildland watch-out situations, the structure protection checklist, and the structure assessment checklist. You can relate the items on these lists to the Rough Diamond Fire, or more importantly, you should relate them to urban interface issues that you face in your local area. The point of this exercise is to get you familiar with these tools and understand how they relate to issues in your area.
My name's Dale Anderson. I'm currently the structure protection group, in charge of the structure protection group for Silver City community, and we're working on the Rough Diamond incident, and we're going to give a briefing here shortly, and we need a kind of a brief overview from Eldon Alexander, who was part of the tactical operation that worked the previous day and early that morning. And Eldon, if you could give us a current situation update off these maps here, and then we'll kind of continue from there.
Okay. Like Dale said, my name's Eldon Alexander. I was initial attack IC Type 3 on this fire. During the transition, I've been kind of attached to Division Alpha on this south side of the fire, and come down here to help you guys get a little idea of what's happening up here on the fire. Currently, the fire is being held along the Silver City Road here around Scotch Bob Creek drainage. You guys drill that's your access into this area. Where the fire line leaves the road here, we have hand crews constructing fire line up towards Bald Mountain. Bald Mountain has been prepped with a dozer line coming up from the road also, and with heavy retardant being laid in this little saddle right in here. The dozer line made it as far as it could around Bald Mountain, and that's why the hand crews are starting up towards it. We're getting a little activity on this side, some torching, making some runs, but it's starting to turn around itself and burn itself back into black, so it's not a real big concern right now. The other high activity area is up here by Little Sugarloaf, and you can see it kind of goes off this map a little bit with the perimeter. It's down in this drainage below Little Sugarloaf. It's made a run up in that area. Those are the 2 hot points right now.
What's the weather outlook for the afternoon?
Yeah, I got max temps 86 to 89 degrees, relative humidity 8% to 13%, valley winds 13 up to 13 miles per hour, ridgetop winds northwest 10 to 20 miles with gusts to 25 miles an hour. So that's going to throw some influence on your fire behavior out there. What we're going to do next is get a little overview from Bruce Alcott, who is our structure protection expert that we brought in with he's kind of our task force leader for our 5 engines that we brought in. And Bruce, if you could kind of give us a little information on what you guys have already assessed as far as the structures, communities, hazards, risks, anything related to that, it'll be great.
Good.
Yeah, we've been up and had a pretty good view of the fire. We got quite a distance between us and them, which gives us a little bit of preparation time. For our personnel, we anticipate that if there is a fire to encroach on Silver City, it'll be coming from up this direction or maybe in from this side a little bit. So what we'll be doing is focusing on those structures that are on that outer perimeter there. So our crews will be looking at that. Some of the things we need to evaluate, obviously, are we may have stored fuels here. We have some propane tanks that folks use. We may have stored fuel oil, gasoline, all those kinds of things. So that creates a hazard for us, and we'll have identified those and know where they are and what we need to do to mitigate those. Water supply, as is indicated, primarily our suppression water will come from what we brought with us and what we've got on the tenders that have been brought in to support us. We also have, though, however, established 3 different drafting points off of the creek here where we've got enough water that we can pump out of and use that to augment our supplies and refill apparatus if we can. The keys here, obviously, as a structure protection, we have to look at what our capabilities are and be realistic about what we can accomplish. Our goal is to prevent it from getting to those structures, so we're assessing the ground fuels that are around those structures to make sure what we can get away from them and to keep the structures from getting involved in the first place. We feel like because of the nature of the fuels that are out there that we've got a pretty good option to, should it come in from this direction, we may be able to actually kind of herd the fire up around that way by doing some back burning and doing some other things that will help there. So that's what we're assessing there. From a safety standpoint, all of our apparatus need to recognize that we got a key point. Here's where we're headquartered. We got one way out from this part of town, and that's across this little bridge down here, so we need to make sure we keep that access clear. There is another access road that comes in here just on the other side of that bridge, and we keep all of our apparatus need to stay on the roads where they can get out quickly. We won't be putting them up in here. We've identified that just down the street and across is down where the park is here is an area that we could seek refuge if we have to. That's a safety factor for all of our personnel to know.
Good. But we still have residences here on location, local residents, right, folks. And there's a system in place now for if we need to do a heads up and an evacuation, then the county sheriff from Hawaii is going to basically handle that. You guys had a chance to go out and take a look at it, and I will go ahead and put that order in so we can get the supplement on the hose and some Mark III pumps and that type of stuff, and kind of basically go from there. And then our early warning system will be basically on what the fire is doing. Of course, the visual indicators, the verbal indicators over the radio, so make sure all the frequencies are dialed in accordingly. And we've double checked that, so we know that's online. Our locals are pretty much dialed in on keeping in touch with us, so we've got those contacts made. Now, for information standpoint, we do have information officer John Skinner on location and here, and he's maintaining contact with our primary information folks. We didn't let news media come in this afternoon because it was going into the heat of the day, but they'll be in first thing in the morning. So when that starts happening, you'll kind of have a clue of what's going on with that. And then also, when you get a chance individually, to make sure you look at your IAP for your assignments for the day. It's also going to include the medical plan because we have a process set up to cover the medical, and then also it has attachments on the maps, safety message. It gives the fire behavior and the weather updates. It's got the communication plan in there, so double check your frequencies on your radios, and it's got the organizational list and the division assignments. So with that, any other questions? Other than that, I think we can continue our work and kind of go from there. So good, thanks.
With the introduction of so many new firefighters this year, it is extremely important to communicate with other firefighters on the fire line. We really can't afford to assume that people are experienced enough to know what's going on out there, especially in an urban wildland interface situation. Another potentially complex situation involves downhill line construction. To help us refresh on the safety concerns specific to cutting line downhill, let's look at the Little Joe fire this last season in Montana. On September 2nd, 2001, this fire grew during a wind event to approximately 860 acres. The fuel type was a mixed conifer, predominantly Douglas fir and lodgepole pine, with heavy accumulations of grass in the meadows. Ladder fuels are present in the understories. A strong north wind took the fire over the ridge, and the fire started backing down the east slope. The fire behavior decreased to a ground fire, but approximately 12 to 15 spot fires had been ignited about 1/4 of a mile below the main fire. The spots were smoldering and creeping with visible smokes. Your job as the division group supervisor is to utilize the available resources to control this section of the line. Your resources consist of 6 Type 2 crews, 2 Type 1 crews, which have already been flown up to the top of the ridge, 4 helicopters, 2 Type 1 and 2 Type 2s, are available for you to use as needed, but their availability cannot be guaranteed for the entire day due to other priorities on the fire. The time is 0900. The weather pattern recently has been consistently hot and dry with increasing afternoon winds. Temperatures have reached as high as 90 degrees and the relative humidity has dropped to as low as 20%. Winds are predominantly out of the southwest, but some passing cold fronts have created some strong but inconsistent north winds. The forecast for September 2nd predicts temperatures at 83 degrees in the lower valleys and 73 degrees on the ridge tops. RHs should drop between 24 and 28% at around 1600 to 1700. Winds are predicted out of the north to northwest at 8 to 10 miles per hour with gusts between 16 and 18 miles an hour. With this information, I'll ask you to get back into your groups and complete the next exercise. Welcome back. Now that you have worked out a basic strategy for this scenario, let's go back to Montana and talk to Rick Vail, who is the Incident Management Team's Operations Section Chief on this fire.
This is Division I, and what happened there, it spotted over the top with the north wind, drove it over the edge, and then it started creeping down. We also had about 15 spot fires, up to 1/8 of a mile below the leading edge of the fire. That caused real problems for us where we decided we had to go indirect and try to pick up all those spots inside an indirect line and then fire it out. That was the plan of the day. We had all of our resources in place to do that burnout. We had hotshot crews up on top and hotshot crews down below. What happened is we had a dramatic increase in humidity from about 25% all the way up above to 45%, and then it started to sprinkle on the area. It got very cloudy. We had our resources in place. We were also confronted with, 2 to 3 days away, a major wind event was predicted, and we knew we had to have this buttoned up before that wind event came, because our primary charge is to protect all this urban interface below in the Yellowstone Valley. Once it got wet like that, we tried a test burn just to see if it would work for our burnout operation, and our test burn didn't burn more than a few feet and then went out. So the choice was then made that we needed to figure out how to go direct. We had hotshot crews chomping at the bit wanting to do that, telling us they could do that. We had a division soup that wanted to do that. A couple other division supervisors that thought we could pull that off. The ops chiefs got together and discussed what are the possibilities here. We know that we're having problems with some of the situations that shout watch out, and we got out our books and started taking a look. And one of the biggest ones was building Fireline downhill. We had crews below and we had crews above. Most of our crews were up above. We also had spot fires below. And the spot fires, some of them were fairly big. Now, none of these are burning very actively. They're just kind of smoldering around in the dust. So the decision was made to go ahead and do the direct and to come from both directions, coming from downhill from the highest knob. So we posted lookouts. The division soup from Division I was the lookout from the top, at the very highest point up there. And the division soup from Division C was down below where he had a good view also. We brought crews in from Division C and started building towards the center. To mitigate downhill line construction and the fact that we had unburned fuel between the spot fires and the leading edge of the fire, we used a lot of bucket drops, and we sent in, I think, 4 Type 2 crews to to go in and grid and line those spots as fast as they could. So they had two Type 1 helicopters and 2 medium helicopters that just hauled in a lot of water. We lined all those and they completed the construction of the line.
Well, that about does it for this section of your refresher training. Our objective was to get you acquainted with the Incident Response Pocket Guide and to give you an opportunity to apply some of the principles in that book to real-life fire scenarios. We hope that your group discussions and review of the scenarios were interesting and educational. But most importantly, we hope that when hazards present themselves this coming fire season, you will more readily recognize them and initiate legitimate hazard mitigation measures. It's up to you to help our fire community lower the average entrapment and shelter deployment rate. Wouldn't it be awesome to have one fire season without any entrapments, deployments, or fatalities? Now, as much as we would all love to see that happen, we still need to prepare for the worst case scenario. For that reason, we still have one more thing to do. That is practice our fire shelter deployment procedures. But before we let your local facilitator run you through the drills, let's listen to a few thoughts on fire shelters and some comments from some people who have lived through that worst case. Thank you for your attention. Have a safe fire season. Remember to maintain your situational awareness. And please, think while you fight fire.
We got to take this seriously. Let's not, you don't go into your shelter laughing and joking. You go into your shelter, in a serious mode and fully realizing that this is some stuff that you have to pay attention to and be ready for. It's a worst case scenario, and this shouldn't happen. And that's one reason why we're all back out here today, is to make sure it doesn't happen. But, we are human beings, and it's probably inevitable that this might happen again, so the best thing you can do is just get as well prepared as possible for it. This is kind of an issue I've had all this season, is not taking advantage of teachable moments, and taking advantage of being in the field and pulling out a scenario in the field, or say you're staging for 12 hours a day and you're just hanging out, because that's kind of the way things work when you're staging. We'll take advantage of pulling out 2 hours, pull out your Fireline handbook. Get your crew boss, make suggestions of trainings you want to receive, or your squad bosses, or crew boss trainees, or whoever it is. But taking advantage of those moments, just to get the training, especially the safety stuff. It'd be a waste if you didn't take advantage of that. And I think crew members sort of have to take some of their own initiative to ask for the training, and sort of make some formal requests and say, hey, we need this, provide it for us. And I think if the forum is created for them to be able to have that voice, I think, it's only going to get better. The fire crews are going to get better, they're going to get better trained, and they're going to have, more leadership coming from the bottom up, which I think is important, taking responsibility.
I would say that, there's a time to joke around and have fun and make this job a good time, and pass along memories and whatnot. But when it comes down to it, the people that are working next to you, you may not see them again if something goes wrong. And it's a very serious job we have here, and people will go their entire lives and their entire careers without deploying their shelters or being put in the situation that I was put in. And so I think if people go into it knowing that, knowing the outcome of mistakes and whatnot, because never in my wildest dreams would I assume that this would happen. And it came down to one day, changed a lot of people's aspects on life. Because there's no real reason why I should be standing here talking to you right now with the events that happened here at 30 Mile. It's changed a lot of things for me. And whatever safety issues can be brought up and addressed from this incident, that's about all we can do with this.